And that makes it official. Welcome everyone to this afternoon / evening's By the Book event in collaboration with the Seminary Co-op Bookstore here in Chicago. Welcome, and we're so excited to be celebrating Lloyd Schwartz's beautiful new collection tonight. I'm going to introduce him in the book in just a second. We're going to go over just a couple of logistical things real quick. We're going to do quick introductions. Lloyd will do some reading, do some chatting with Alan Shapiro, do some more reading, and then we'll open things up for Q&A at the end. If you have questions that arise throughout the event, feel free to pop them in the chat to everyone and we'll read them out later. Or once we get to question and answer time, you can raise your hand physically or virtually and unmute yourself, and we can do it that way. All right, I'm popping a link into the chat. If you want to buy Lloyd's book from the Seminary Co-op Bookstore, if you haven't been there, they're a wonderful establishment and we want to support them as much as we can. And I've also put a link to our YouTube page where this event's recording will be posted in a week or so. We also just posted last week's Phoenix Poets reading with Chioma Elliott and Michael Collier, so you can check that one out as well. All right, and on to introductions. My name is Adrienne Myers. I work with the Phoenix Poets series at the University of Chicago Press. Tonight's featured poet is Lloyd Schwartz, who is the Frederick S. Professor of English Emeritus at the University of Massachusetts, Boston, a longtime commentator on classical music and the arts for National Public Radio's Fresh Air, and a noted editor of Elizabeth Bishop's Poetry and Prose. He's been awarded the Pulitzer Prize for Criticism, Guggenheim and National Endowment for the Arts Fellowships in Poetry, and the Poet Laureateship of the City of Somerville, Massachusetts. His poems have appeared in The New Yorker, New Republic, and Atlantic, and have been selected for the Pushcart Prize, Best American Poetry, the best of American poetry. Among his poetry books are Little Kisses, Cairo, Traffic, and Goodnight, Gracie, all published by the University of Chicago Press. Alan Shapiro, who will be joining Lloyd in conversation tonight, has published many books, including Against Translation, Life, Pig, and Reel to Reel, which was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize. He has also been a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award in Nonfiction and Poetry and the National Book Award, and the winner of the LA Times Books Prize, Kingsley Tufts Award, Writers Award from the American Academy of Arts and Letters, and 2 awards from the National Endowments for the Arts. A member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, he is the William R. Keenan Jr. Professor of English and Comparative Literature at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. So immensely distinguished guests we have with us tonight. And with those introductions, I will turn it over to Lloyd so we can hear some poetry.
Thank you, Adrienne. Thank you, Alan, for well, for everything, and for being willing to chat with me for a little bit this afternoon. And thank you, everyone, for coming today. What a spectacular audience, including some people who are dear to me, whom I haven't seen in decades, and you know who you are. So I'm going to read, I think, maybe 5 poems to begin with, and then we'll chat. Alan and I will chat for a little bit and see what happens after that. So I'm going to start with a true poem. I'm working on a poem that's so true, I can't show it to anyone. I could never show it to anyone because it says exactly what I think, and what I think scares me. Sometimes it pleases me. Usually it brings misery. And this poem says exactly what I think. What I think of myself, what I think of my friends, what I think about my lover. Exactly. Parts of it might please them. Some of it might scare them. some of it might bring misery. And I don't want to hurt them. I don't want to hurt them. I don't want to hurt anybody. I want everyone to love me. Still, I keep working on it. Why? Why do I keep working on it? Nobody will ever see it. Nobody will ever see it. I keep working on it even though I can never show it to anybody. I keep working on it even though someone might get hurt. And the next poem is the title poem of this collection. And it is a dialogue, or a series of dialogues. Who's on first? You can be so inconsiderate. You are too sensitive. Then why don't you take my feelings into consideration? If you weren't so sensitive, it wouldn't matter. You seem to care about me only when you want me to do something for you. You do too much for people. I thought you were going home because you were too tired to go with me to a bar. I was, but Norman didn't want to come here alone. I'm awfully tired. Do you mind taking the subway home? Silence. You could stay over. Silence. I'll take you home. Silence. Why do we have sex only when you want to? Because you want to have sex all the time. Relationships work when two people equally desire to give to each other. Relationships rarely work. Do you love me? Of course, but I resent it. Why aren't you more affectionate? I am. Couldn't we ever speak to each other without irony? Sure. I love you, you know. Yes, but why? Do you resent my advice? Yes, especially because you're usually right. Why do you like these paintings? What isn't there is more important than what is. Your taste sometimes seems strange to me. I'm a Philistine. A real Philistine would never admit it. I suppose you're right. Aren't you interested in what I care about? Yes, but not now. We should be more open with each other. Yes. Shall we talk things over? What is there to say? Are you ever going to cut down on your smoking? It's all right. I don't inhale. Sometimes I get very annoyed with you. The world is annoying. Your cynicism is too easy. Words interfere with the expression of complex realities. Do you enjoy suffering? You can't work if you don't suffer, but we suffer anyway. I know. Do you think we ever learn anything? I've learned to do without. You're always so negative. I feel death all the time. Are you afraid of anything? Not working. What shall we do for dinner? It doesn't matter. Whatever you'd like. Why don't you care more? I do. And this is another love poem, crossword for David. You're doing a crossword. I'm working on a puzzle. Do you love me enough? What's the missing word? Do I love you enough? Where's the missing piece? Yesterday I was cross with you. You weren't paying enough attention. You were cross with me. I wasn't paying enough attention. Our words crossed. Where are the missing pieces? What are the missing words? Yet last night we fit together like words in a crossword, pieces of a puzzle. And I'd like to read two poems about my mother. And then Alan and I can chat a bit. So this, the first one is entirely in my mother's voice, and it's called The Two Horses, a Memory. You said you had lunch in Pittsfield. Was it on North Street? That reminds me of when we lived on the farm. It must be 80 years ago. We went to a one-room schoolhouse. Didn't you drive past it once? Each row was a different grade. I sat in the first seat of the first row. The teacher's name was Miss Brown. She was so pretty. I wonder if she's still alive. The day before we left the farm, our cat disappeared. We couldn't find her anywhere. I was sad for weeks. 3 months later, she showed up at our new house in Pittsfield, Robbins Avenue. I can't think of the number now. My sister was in New York. She didn't like the people she was living with, so she'd visit us. She fell in love with the young man who lived next door, Morris, your uncle Morris. They got married and moved to Cleveland. They're both gone now, aren't they? You know, I can't picture her. A few years later, we moved to New York. This just jumped into my mind. I must have been 3 years old. We were still in Russia, Mir, a small town, but famous for its yeshiva. My oldest brother, Joe, took our horses down to the river. They were the two best horses in the town. My father had a phaeton, a beautiful old buggy. He was like a taxi driver. He took people to Minsk or Vilna. That day he was at the station, the passenger station, waiting for customers. My brother was still just a kid. He must have been washing the horses in the river. I can remember. It was a hot day. Maybe he was giving them a drink. And while I was watching, the reins got caught around a pole in the river. The horses kept twisting the reins around that pole. It was slippery. The reins kept sliding down under the water, and they were pulling the horses down with them. I ran into town and got my father, who came running back with a knife in his teeth. He jumped into the river with all his clothes on. He took the knife and sawed away at the reins until he finally cut through. He saved the horses. I haven't thought about this in 1,000 years. It's like a dream. You get up, it's forgotten. Then it all comes back. Didn't I ever tell you? Look at me. I'm starting to cry. What's there to cry about? Such an old, old memory. Why should it make me cry? And this is a conversation with my mother and me. He tells his mother what he's working on. I'm writing a poem about you. You are? What's it about? It's the story about your childhood, the horses in the river. The ones that nearly drowned, I saved them. You told it to me just a few weeks ago. I should dig up more of my memories. I wish you would. Like when I lived on the farm and one of the girls fell down the well. Yes. I forget if it was Rose or Pauline. It was a deep well. I remember that story. Have you finished your poem? I'm still working on it. You mean you're correcting it with commas and semicolons? Exactly. When can I see it? As soon as it's finished. Is it an epic? It's not that long. No, I mean, all my thoughts, the flashes of what's going through my life, the whole family history, living through the woe, the river and the water. I know. Will it be published? I have to finish it first. It's better to write about real life. That's more important than writing something fanciful. I try to write all my poems about real life. You see, the apple never falls far from the tree. I guess not. You're my apple. There's probably a worm crawling through that apple. Then it's got something sweet to chew on. Well, you're my tree. Yes, I'm your tree. You're an apple. I'm a tree. Alan?
I mute myself. Lloyd, okay, here's the thing. God, I love your poems. Just have to say, it's such a pleasure to hear them. And so here's the thing. All right. So this is what I want to say. I want to go back to the first poem you read, Who's on First? And the stanza, why do you like these paintings? What isn't there more important than, no, what isn't there is more important than what is. And, when I was getting ready for this conversation, not a conversation, but actually just one question, and then that's it, I'm out. But I just wanted to get, but the fact is, I thought, that's the thing. Like in context, in context of that poem, this is just another way in which the speakers and lovers talk past each other, but your poems early and late leave out so much of what other poets conventionally put in: description, context, external detail, elaboration, narrative, exposition. You figured out a way to leave out everything, but the psychosocial meaning of the voice, of the human voice, speaking to another person, another voice. And that's what I fucking love it. Sorry, excuse me, the language. That's what I love about the poems, is the way that, it just shows you how, if you want to get a full experience of an experience, you don't have to include everything about it. It all gets distilled into the voice. and into a voice speaking with another voice. And so what I wanted to ask you is, how is it that you came upon this? I mean, I know that, Elizabeth Bishop has, her speaking voice is so present, and you and along with, Frank Bedard and Gail Mazur and Robert Pinsky and so many other people have redefined what we thought we could do in terms of just sort of social experience. But you took this to an extreme. And again, not all your poems are like the poems that you read tonight, but you took this to an extreme of just trusting that everything that needs to be expressed can be expressed through the social idiom of a voice engaging with another voice. And it engages with it in ways that the social spaces of our culture don't actually have any way of articulating. So that's what I love about it. How did you do that? That's my question. How did you come to that? What were the influences? How did you have the courage to actually just pursue that as a way of writing?
There are a couple of answers to that question, and one is that I really loved speaking voices in poetry. So Chaucer, Browning, Robert Frost, and of course Bishop did that too. She spoke in her own voice, but she also spoke in other voices.
Right.
And so there was a kind of predisposition. I mean, if I had to choose between Browning and Tennyson, I would choose Browning. Um, um, and I would also add that I spend a lot of time listening to music and going to concerts, and the music I like most, and I don't just mean singers, but the music I like most, the violinists and the pianists and the string quartets and the orchestras that I like most are the ones that really sound like they're speaking.
Wow.
And not just playing. And even singers. I mean, someone like Maria Callas, who sounds like she's talking the aria, that she's really experiencing it. So this is something that just reaches me.
Yeah. Because even in the poems that don't have other people in them, when they're dramatic monologues or when they're in a kind of lyric mode where you're just speaking to yourself, it still sounds like you're talking to somebody else. And it still sounds like we have interrupted into we have sort of entered into the poem in the middle of a conversation. I just always feel that. And I just think it's just something really particular to you and to the kind of poems you've written, and why. I mean, aside from I've written about this, about this, the way you have, desentimentalized. I guess that's sweetness. Like you've made sweetness a really powerful, mode of tragedy. And when I hear about that poem about either your mother asking about the poem you're writing about, or which also expresses a ton of things that any writer thinks about but would never admit to. But you just put it out there. But when she's talking about like the two horses, it's an elegy, but there's nothing elegy-like about it, because she's mourning the obliteration of her past, of her father, and yet it's all about this saving of these two horses and redeeming her brother from the terrible, fallout that would have happened had the horses died. But that's all, that's all outside the poem, really. This, well, actually, that's inside the poem. What's outside the poem is why she would be saying that to you at the end of her life when everybody's dead and everybody's gone. I find that just there, that goes back to where I started, where the most important things in your poems depend, are outside, but depend on the most important things that are in your poems.
Um, I, I want to say that some of that I get directly from my mother.
Fantastic.
And I think maybe Wade Rowland can disagree with me, but I think as a teacher, I'd like to think that I was a good listener.
God, I bet.
And I think as a person, I hope I am a good listener.
But it's more than that. It's more than that, Lloyd, I would say, because it's not just that you're a good listener, which you are, but you're also someone who thinks that the essence of life is in the exchange between one voice and another. It's one voice always talking to another, even if the other voice is not there.
Well, there's another little background bit of information. And I'm not sure which came first, but I had very serious ambitions to be an actor. And I was very serious about acting. And I did some acting when I was a child. And then I stopped acting when I was in college because I couldn't stand the people who were in the drama club. And I stopped acting, and I stopped acting through most of graduate school. And when the day I passed my orals, I was telling one of my students about this summer theater company that was doing some amazing work, and God, I wished I could be in it. And she challenged me to audition. And I did audition, and I got a very small part, which had a very big laugh attached to it. And I ended up being in 4 plays in 8 weeks, and my parts kept getting bigger and bigger. And I continued I pursued that. And I really thought I might become an actor. And I was acting with people like Stockard Channing and Tommy Lee Jones, and really amazing people. Then I lost the teaching job that I had, and the only teaching job I could get meant teaching at night. And teaching at night meant I had to stop acting on the stage. And there was a real turning point, and I wasn't sure what I should do, but I was too much of a coward to say, just screw it all, I'll try acting. And I knew there were good actors who were as good as the ones you've heard of, who couldn't get a job, doing a commercial. And I was too scared about that. And I also didn't want to give up teaching. So I took the teaching job, and more or less gave up acting on stage, at any rate.
Not on the page. That's great.
And then I don't know why, or I do know why now, but I certainly didn't know why at the time, that I got very bored with the poems I was writing. And they were all about myself and my heartbroken romances and frustrations, and I just got tired of them. And I thought, well, I wanted to write things on various subjects, but I didn't want to write them in my own voice. And I started writing these monologues, and they were getting published.
Mm-hmm.
When I sent them out, they were getting published. And Frank Bedart was one of the people who encouraged me to do this, and he saw immediately that I was doing something
Different
that I hadn't been doing before, and that mainly other people weren't doing either.
exactly. Mm-hmm.
And then I started really thinking about what you needed to do if you were going to write in other people's voices.
Mm-hmm.
And I think now, even when I write in my own voice, it's another voice. It's not the voice that I have in my conversations with you.
You know, it's so interesting. I love that answer, and it's like, you know, it's like I don't know, like if you eliminate exposition, you increase the chances of immediacy, but you also decrease the chances of lucidity. Like no one's going to know who's. Find a way in which you can convey a context, and then not have to give any of it, and just let the voice be the medium, because that's how it is. Most of us, that's how our lives are. They're in exchange with other people in what we say. And I don't know, there's just something really brilliant, and and one of those things, like it seems like low-hanging fruit when somebody picks it, but until they pick it, nobody would even think to pick it. And I feel the same way, like with Frank and with Robert and with all of the people. Now I shouldn't name names because I'll leave people out and then I'll get canceled. But I just think it's like a really beautiful thing to just find something and then realize, I can convey a whole lot of human experience through this. And again, it's not the only thing you do. You do all, but even when you're doing something like some internal meditation, I still feel as though it's somebody talking to somebody else. I feel like there's a human presence, always engaging another human presence. That's a beautiful thing, I think.
Thank you.
What about you, Will?
It is true that I think most of my process of revision is taking things out.
Yeah. But not taking them out so that they're not there, but so that they're just there, but they're outside what's there.
Can I add something?
Yes.
Sure.
Am I still muted?
No, I can hear you.
Hi, Frank.
I think another part of the answer to Alan's question is that the other person in that poem who's on first is Ralph Hamilton. And particularly Ralph's work at that time was full of negative spaces, and what isn't there is as important as what is. And that I think, I know when I first heard Who's on First, I felt that comment that dialogue applied not only to Lloyd's work, but to Ralph's work. And Ralph was articulating something that was very important to him and absolutely central to what he was doing.
Mm-hmm.
So look at the cover of my book, and that's exactly a painting by Ralph Hamilton.
I didn't know that.
And what isn't there is as important as what is.
Absolutely. And really, honestly, don't you think, in no matter how much is there, what isn't there is as important as what is, because what is wouldn't be as important if what wasn't there wasn't there. I just think that, that it's just a way. But the thing that I admired, just kind of, in terms of just sort of the I don't know, just how you sit down and write a poem is the courage to just do without so much, to just let go of all the things. Like if I gave somebody the assignment of writing a poem describing something, they would just fill it up with description. You probably would just have it like two voices, just sort of exchanging, you know, a minimal of, you know, a kind of haiku dialogue, you know, and I think that's a beautiful thing. I just think it's not the only thing, but it's a beautiful thing. And you do other things and you embed that into a larger context. But I really love the way in which it seems to me, now I don't know you as well as Frank does or Gail or anybody else, but it feels to me as though you found your way into your voice by allowing voices to enter your work. That's just the way it seems to me. Your mother, even your own, you know.
Yeah. Thank you.
Maybe we should get some questions from other people. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, feel free to post questions in the chat, or I think we have a manageable enough group that you can just unmute yourself. Yeah, we could just free float a little bit. Lloyd, if you had another poem you wanted to read while folks formulate questions, we can do that too.
Yeah, I would let me read at least one more poem. A lot of the poems that I have been writing, you know, I think we have enough time to do this. Yeah, this is a poem about Ralph Hamilton's paintings. It's called Ralph Hamilton's Faces. And it begins with an epigraph from a review of one of Ralph's shows. At the end of each century, Boston has had a portrait painter of great interpretive gifts. Copley in the 18th, Sargent in the 19th, and I'd argue Hamilton in the 20th. He is creating one of those invaluable records that tell what a historical period was about. And that's by David Benetti in a review in the Boston Phoenix. What the hell is this? B. Arthur bellowed when he shoved his camera up against her nose. An ad for facial hair? He always painted his portraits from his own pictures. 20 clicks, 30 clicks, the eventual photos largely unrecognizable. Pierre Boulez, Sarah Caldwell, Jay Cantor, Elliot Carter, Alfred Chandler, Faye Chandler, Phyllis Curtin, Elsa Dorfman, Richard Dyer. If he was lucky, he'd find one shot that worked. Then he'd project that photo onto a 30 by 30-inch museum board, filling the entire space with one face. Annie Fisher, Bob Garris, Bob Ginsberg with his eyes closed, Terry Gross, John Harbison, Seamus Heaney, Rachel Jacob, her face a lunar landscape, Rudy Kickle, Alice Madison, Michael Mazer, James Merrill. Tracing the contours of that face, he turned the projection into a kind of topographical map, readable only to him. Then very carefully, he'd fill in all the spaces. He called this his paint by numbers phase. Alice Methvessel, Mark Morris, Seiji Ozawa, Robert Polito, Anya Cilia, Harvey Silverglade, Isaac Silverglade, Craig Smith, Gene Stapleton. Once every space was painted in, he'd take a clean brush and start to move the paint, to brush the paint away. Turn the board sideways, then upside down, and keep brushing, brushing and brushing the paint violently away. His brushing, one critic wrote, brings the viewer into direct contact not so much with the illusion of movement as with the inner workings of movement itself. Stop too soon, the person might not yet have begun to breathe. Take too long, the person could get brushed completely away. High wire act over an abyss. Until suddenly that huge face became the face he saw in his head. Bewildered Klaus Tenstedt, glamorous Violette Verdi, Michael York. York, always prepared to be photographed, would freeze a split second ahead of each camera click and ended up as two separate portraits, each one totally different, each one completely himself. 100 faces, Nancy Armstrong to Ben Zander, comic and tragic masks, unmasked, the web of our life. Actors, musicians, writers, dancers, other artists and museum curators. My father, my mother, John Pajewski's mother, himself. Each face emerging from under that volatile surface. Looking at a Hamilton portrait, a viewer observed, is like being in the middle of an intimate conversation. Each blurring brushstroke, an increasingly complex disclosure of tenderness or reproof, curiosity or indifference. No one he particularly needed to speak to, only someone he needed to speak to him.
Thank you, Lloyd.
Thank you.
Yeah, if anyone has questions, feel free to put them in the chat or unmute yourself and have a little conversation.
Hey, Lloyd,
Hi, Tom.
I've got a question.
Yeah?
So one thing I wanted to ask you about is just can you talk about the way the page does more than just register the speech? Because it seems like one of the things that the page does for you is that there's a kind of odd congruence between the actual spokenness of the writtenness on the page, and it seems as if you're interested in a certain kind of dramatic suspense in the way in which the syntax plays out. Anyway, that was something that I was wondering about, and in the fact that in this poem you've got complete sentences and those kind of alternate, and then the other poems are much more heavily in jam. I'm just wondering if you could talk about that.
Yeah. Well, this has been a very long process of discovery, and the monologues, especially the poems in the voices, poems and dialogues in the voices of other people, really began as kind of looking like poems with line breaks that suggested inflection, that suggested vocal inflection. Certainly in my more recent poems, I found a way in which the stanzas are each sentences, and usually just a single sentence. And what interests me, and I think it's interested me as a reader for almost my whole life, but as a writer, it's been very interesting to discover that some sentences are very long and some sentences are very short, and that they bounce off each other in a nuanced or expressive way, and that the more recent poems have really been my trying to find the rhythm of that interchange, that interchange between sentences,
Mm.
so that it wasn't like trying to, fill the form of a villanelle or a sestina or a sonnet even, but that you could see that happening on the page in a way that in a more traditional poetic form, you don't always see the difference between a short sentence and a long sentence.
You know,
Though they're there.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Tom. I know that was a great question, and to me, that answer just is a perfect illustration of, what's left out is just as important as what's put in, and now the short sentence comes, and it's not a long sentence, and the fact that it's not a long sentence is just as important as if it were. In fact, it's more important because it makes you notice it. Anyway, I'm sorry, Tom, to interrupt.
Oh, it's fine.
We have a note from Wade in the chat as well. It says, I found that writing in the voice of a persona gives me an amount of license to express thoughts or even use words that my persona would never use, even ideas that my persona wouldn't.
You suffer from diabetes type 2 or pre.
On interlude. And yes, do your persona give you similar freedom?
Yes, and I think I definitely. And I think especially my very early persona poems, those very early monologues, really were a way of allowing me to write about things that I would never dream of writing in my own voice.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the reasons it was really very exciting to kind of stumble on that kind of poem was that it was so liberating, and that my earlier poems, which, as I say, were all just about myself and my own angst, just gave me a kind of incredible freedom and liberation to really write about anything.
Yeah, perfect. Great.
So yeah, Wade, thank you for that question. Any more questions? These are really good questions.
Lloyd,
I have to say, Yehudi.
Yeah. Do you happen to have a small painting or something we could see of Hamilton's that you could show on the screen?
That was a book.
I'm surrounded by them. I mean, there's the book cover.
Well, even that would.
So. Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's very good. Very good.
So that's a detail from a 6-foot square painting, from a 6-foot square canvas.
Right.
And it's a lot of the painting, but not quite all of it. It's really the center of the painting. Oh, thanks, Adrian. That's great. And all of my book covers have can we put the just not get rid of the shared screen? So this is the cover of my last book, and that is one of those portraits. It's the original of my mother.
Yeah. Again, so much is left out, isn't it?
Exactly.
And that's the complete painting, and it's 30 inches by 30 inches. It's this huge face, and he just kept brushing the paint away until the person emerged. Beautiful. Oh.
Probably have time for one more question before we officially wrap up. If anyone has any final questions for Lloyd and or Alan.
No reason to have a question for me.
Well, I don't have a question, but I do have a comment, and that I just absolutely love. Among many of the things in Lloyd's poems is the sense of humor that he has, and also the sense of perfect timing that he has. Even in the way he reads something, he'll give you a pause, the way great comics give you a pause to let you get it before he goes on. And it's usually those moments come in dark moments. So you have the comedy and the darkness walking hand in hand. And it's just a really wonderful, brilliant way of presenting material.
I think I want to spend the rest of my life listening to this conversation.
Wait, can I just interrupt that? Because I love that question. Oh, this wasn't a question, it was a comment. It was a great comment. And it's that when you think about all of the best jokes, when you think about all, what is it that makes us laugh? It's like the worst things. It's always the worst things. It's like betrayal, it's impotence, it's old age, it's humiliation, go on and on and on. And jokes, in fact, are an embodiment of art. It's a way in which we embrace our, benighted-ness and turn it into something that makes us look good. That's everywhere in Lloyd's work, everywhere. Yeah. And what it makes you do is it makes you go back to jokes and think, well, we need to take them more seriously because they're more interesting investigations into human experience than most of the poems that you would read otherwise that don't make you laugh. So anyway, that's just my own little, comment about that.
I think that's a great place to maybe officially close our event out tonight. Let's give a round of applause. I'll stop the recording, but feel free to hang out for a second and say hello. Thank you so much for sharing your beautiful work, Lloyd.
Lloyd, you are so great. Thank you.
Thank you.